I was sexually abused as a child. Everything changed from the moment that myself and my sister spoke out about this.
What actually made you have the courage to do that?
My sister, she said to me, Hannah, there's something we need to talk about. I thought I was the only one. It just hit me, literally like a tsunami. I plead with people to speak out. This will come back to get you at some point in your life. When I tried to fight for justice in the legal sense, we didn't want a settlement. We don't want money. We don't want anything like that. We wanted justice first and foremost, and for this person, for it to be acknowledged, the disgusting crimes that they committed. If you're using terms like private parts, your kid will think that they're private, so they're not going to talk about them. If your kid comes to you and says, somebody touched my vagina,
what should people expect when they do tell? Series 11 of the Dig podcast. I can't believe Series 11. I didn't even know how to press record on that very first episode, but we are back for you, the listener. Real lives, real moments. That's what we need. We need real stories, things that people are going through in everyday life, brought straight to you, but with, most importantly, actionable advice. And that's what all our guests are going to bring to you in Series 11. This is real lives and real moments, so we are going to be covering sensitive topics, and I just want to give you a heads up about that. Welcome back to the Dig podcast. Childhood sexual abuse is too much of a burden for one person to carry for their whole lives. Speaking out has freed us. This is a quote from the Irish Independent. Hannah Saunders and her sister Caroline were interviewed. And Hannah is joining me today on the Dig podcast, and we're going to talk about her experience of dealing with childhood sexual abuse. And now this isn't something that we've ever talked about on the Dig podcast, but since we've opened up the conversation about real topics and real lives, it's an issue that can't be ignored. And I've never spoken to anybody about it before, either on a personal level or on a podcast. So it's been a learning journey for me too, and one that Hannah has helped me through as well in our call before the podcast. And that's something we're going to talk about today as well, having conversations, important ones like this, and how important it is and the impact that it can have. When I had my call with Hannah, you know, it was really positive because her passion and determination to make a difference really shone through, and it really helped me as well. And I did admit to her that I was nervous, and she was like, we can talk about anything here. So I think that really will help other people as well. So thank you for being on the Dig podcast, Hannah.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me on.
Oh no, it's great. And it's great to be able to see you in person as well, because we've been doing Zooms and things. And I did say to you when we had our call that, you know, I was more nervous than normal because I have never talked about such a sensitive topic before, but you put me right at ease. I know we want to do that for the listener as well. And you did say, you know, don't be afraid. We can't be afraid of these things, which is, you know, what we're talking about today. So I suppose, do you want to, you know, take us back to, you know, the early days whenever this became something for you that you felt you needed to share? What was that journey like for you as a young person?
Of course. So I think many, I suppose, victims and survivors of childhood sexual abuse will often compartmentalize their lives into kind of before and after, not necessarily before the abuse and after the abuse, but before talking about the abuse and after talking, because that's for me how I kind of see my life now, because everything changed from the moment that myself and my sister spoke out about this. So I'm now 34. I think I was around 25 when I first spoke about this to my family. And when my sister and myself first spoke to each other about it, we were about 25. So I suppose there was roughly maybe, you know, 15 years of our lives where this was never, ever discussed. And we are an incredibly close family. My sister and I, if we're not audio noting, we're WhatsApping every day. We lived in London together for many years. Now she's still in London, but we've always been that close. We've been that close before speaking out about it, and even closer now because I suppose we just have been on such a journey together. So yeah, we kind of hid this. We hid it from each other. We hid it from everybody else that we knew and loved, and everyone who knew and loved us. For over 15 years, longer for my sister. My sister's 4 years older than me. So now we're going on, I'd say it's 8 or 9 years since it was the first time that, you know, we ever kind of brought this to people's attentions. But to be honest with you, I still feel like I'm doing that. I still meet people who never knew this about me. And not that there's a reason for them to know, but I still feel like I'm connecting people about this all the time. And I suppose by speaking to you today, and by, you mentioned The Independent earlier with Leah Hines, who I spoke to there, fantastic journalist. The reason I do that is because I really want to encourage more people to speak out. You mentioned earlier you've never discussed this with anyone, and honestly, count yourself lucky that you've never had to. It's a very complicated topic. It's a very sensitive topic, but believe me, as a victim, it's incredibly tough. And it can be really tough and isolating to find the words and find the right, I suppose, avenue to take in speaking out. In Ireland, typically sexual abuse and child sexual abuse is linked to either a family member, somebody known to the family, a neighbour, a teacher. Generally, it's somebody that is close to a child. And therefore, that adds extra layers of complexity when it comes to speaking out, because not only are you going to shock the people who you love and who love you the most, but life for them may also change after that moment, and big decisions will have to be made. And believe me, there's lots of complications and stresses that comes with speaking out. But from a victim, I just want to be able to speak out and say that you deserve to speak out. And those complexities and complications and maybe some backlash you might get from people who you thought would have your back, you deserve to speak out, and that should never, ever stop you or block you. And I've been discovering that over the last 8 or 9 years. And there are going to be people who you speak to who handle it really empathetically and who just really show up for you. They might be people who you didn't even expect would, but who just do. Then there's other people who you may have expected would be your absolute rock and pillar through this, but they just don't know how to handle it, and that's okay. And when you do go on this journey, you will find that you can't expect everybody to have the words or to have the advice or to even be able to take it on board themselves. So I would kind of say that, like, on this journey, I found out so much about myself, but so much about other people too. And I know my sister would say it too, that we are very lucky in our circumstance that our family had our back through it all. And we have some amazing friends in our lives, and our husbands, Caroline's husband, George, and my husband, Richie, who have just been such phenomenal support systems to us. But Caroline, over the last, I suppose, 8 years, the first few years we handled things very privately. I don't think I spoke out I suppose I say publicly, but I guess through having a few followers on Instagram, I refer to that as publicly. But even outside my initial, say, family, that was only really 2 or 3 years ago where I started to speak like that. So it's still very new for me. But from the first time I ever did mention it, I was just so blown away and, well, on one hand, saddened by the amount of people who came forward to me to explain their situations. And I guess it's one of those times where you're like, okay, well, look, it's nice to not feel alone, but at the same time, you almost wish you were alone and that no one else was going through this, or no one else had these skeletons in the closet. And it's, for so many people who are abuse victims, particularly childhood abuse victims, it's not just something that happened to them as a child. This lives with you forever. Maybe not every day, but it comes in waves. And the trauma and the impact of that abuse, even if it was 20 years ago, has its own cruel way of coming back to haunt you, maybe when you least expect it. And so that's another reason why I think it's really important for people who do feel like they have the strength to speak out and speak up, because by doing that, you free yourself of, I suppose, those kind of demons and those feelings that come up that you have to handle on your own, because no one should have to handle that on their own. At least now, if there ever is something, maybe perhaps, I mean, I hate the word triggering because I think it's sometimes used too much almost. Look, every day in our lives, there's going to be things that trigger us. but no one's triggering you. It's just your reaction and your response to something that you've seen. But for me, for example, it might be a show that I'm watching or a book that I've read or maybe something I've seen on the news, and I just might relate to it quite personally. And, you know, I could be having a really busy work week. I could be in the middle of putting together a massive new business pitch, and all of a sudden this comes on and I'm just stopped in my tracks. And, you know, at least then I know a few people around me will understand why maybe I'm feeling a bit sad that week, or they will reach out to me to say, look, I saw this all over the news. I appreciate that this might be, you know, quite an upsetting time for you. Whereas when no one knows what you're going through and you have those like episodes or those moments where you're feeling very vulnerable or upset or triggered, it's very hard to handle that when you don't have people in your corner. So I suppose that's the journey I've been coming to learn over the last 8 years, and what I feel I can now be a bit of an advocate for, because I have learned so much and grown so much since the first day I ever spoke out. But even sitting here today, it's still not easy.
Thank you so much again for listening to the Dig podcast. And don't forget, if you like listening each week, if you love our guests, please hit that follow button if you're listening on Apple or Spotify. If you're watching on YouTube, hit subscribe. And that means even more people can find out about the Dig podcast, and we can keep reaching out to the guests each week and bringing you some inspirational stories with actionable advice. Now we're going straight back to our amazing guest. No, it's not. And I'm sitting listening to everything, and I know we've talked before, but I feel like I've just heard it for the first time. But there's people that are going to be listening to this that know someone that has, are themselves, or have been, and this is going to help them so much. But I know because we talked about it, but just let the listener know, what was Hannah like before she told everyone, like teenage years and all? How was that all for you? You were keeping it inside, but you hadn't told anyone, but it had happened. So what was life like then when you didn't tell anyone?
Look, I'm not one of those people who's going to sit here and say, look, I had a terrible childhood or terrible teenage years or anything like that. I didn't. I come from a wonderful, incredibly loving family. I went to an exceptional school here in Dublin. I've always had the best friends who are like a sisterhood. I'm extremely fortunate. So although horrible things happened to me, and absolutely they have had a profound impact on my life, I did manage to find lots of happiness throughout my life and still continue to do so. Of course, there are things that I look back on and I now understand, okay, maybe I handled that situation in that way because of what I went through. And for me, it wasn't really until I was in secondary school when I actually was able to acknowledge I was abused. And that was because we were in a class, and I think it was like SPHE, I don't know if they call it the same in Northern Ireland teaching systems, basically like sex education as such. And they were talking through however they do in schools, very awkwardly usually. And that's when I kind of was sitting there and I was like, okay, right, I always thought what happened to me was really, really bad. I didn't like it. I didn't know how to tell anybody. But now this is confirmed that what happened to me was sexual abuse. And what I went through for all that time was very cruel, evident sexual abuse. But I was 13 then. I was in first year in school, and I've said this before when speaking to people, because one of the first things people ask is, why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you shout about it then? Or why didn't you do something about it? But try telling that to a 13-year-old girl who just wants to fit in and who doesn't want to, and still, you're 13, you're still so young. And for me, still, I'm 34 now, and it's, I'm getting better at speaking about even saying the two words sexual abuse, but even saying the word sex when you're 13 is, something that can be very awkward for a teenager. So I just made a decision with myself then that, what, didn't like that, don't like that happened to me, but I'm going to keep that to myself. And so, yeah, I just burrowed it away. And I know when I was 16, I told a friend, very briefly and kind of top line. But it just goes to show that like it never kind of went away. Like there was, you know, it was always kind of there. And when I guess I started to mature and when friendships started to really tighten with people, that's when you find your, you know, I think even with your family, you can be as close as you like with the family, but sometimes it's a friendship where you have those conversations that just come out a little bit easier. So I think I was about 16 before I ever mentioned it for the first time, but again, burrowed it away after that. So look, I got on great in school. I had a happy schooling. My sister's not on the podcast today, so I won't speak on her behalf, but I know that I was able to burrow it away a lot more than she was. So we would definitely have very different kind of accounts of how this trauma manifested itself. Mine definitely was worse in my 20s than it was in my teens. And I'm saying that because anyone who's listening to this, I don't want them to feel like, oh my God, my teenage years were the worst years of my life. Like, how is she saying that it was fine? Or likewise, some people might say, I was abused as a child, but it's never impacted me. Everybody's situation is so different. And it doesn't matter if you were abused once or over the course of several years, or whatever age you were, it's going to impact you differently. I kind of took a bit of the attitude of, I'm bearing this away because I don't want it to kind of define who I am. I've always been very driven, very ambitious, quite tunnel vision. If I get something in my head that I want to do, like I'm not stopping until I achieve that. And I felt that the more I let this in, the more it was becoming a roadblock to doing all the things that I wanted to do. But you eventually it catches up on you. And as I said, it was kind of my early 20s where it really started to impact me. So as I said, school was okay, college was okay. I think maybe looking back, I would have times where maybe I would take things a little bit sensitively, or perhaps even, you know, parents would say like, why are you very defensive? But now I look back and I'm like, I was defensive because I needed to be. Because maybe at one point in my life, I felt no one was defending me. So I had to do that for myself. So I think probably having traits of like being quite defensive, being quite stubborn, and being quite, I suppose, stuck in my ways maybe is all, I think, quite linked to that as well, and kind of almost like regaining control that I lost at one point in my life. But on the whole, happy teen years, happy college years, great relationships with friends, met my fabulous husband when I was 16. So like he, I think, was just, he was my constant and still is, and is just, even today coming on this podcast, he calls me in the car saying, best of luck, hope you get on okay, you know? So I think through that, like, and through having good people in my life, I managed to maintain like a really good level of a happy life. And again, I know that's not the case for a lot of people. So yeah, kind of then, as I said, my sort of early 20s is where things started to physically and mentally really start to impact me. And I know from talking to multiple therapists who I've gone to over the last number of years, they all kind of say the same thing, which is interesting because none of these people are linked, is that this will come back to get you at some point in your life. And that's why I just, you know, I plead with people to speak out, because nothing breaks my heart more than hearing, quite recently in Ireland, we've had some horrific cases of childhood sexual abuse linked to school systems and churches and that kind of thing. And you hear of men who are speaking out for the first time in their 70s. You know, they're telling their families or their best friend for the first time in their 70s. And it makes me so upset to think that these poor men, because of, I suppose, society in Ireland, felt like they could never open up, and they've waited all their lives. And, you know, there was two wonderful brothers, one who has since passed away, who I remember listening to them on the Late Late Show, and they were speaking about how one of them, I know, turned into a very heavy drinker, and then one of them, you know, was really struggling with work, and people didn't really know why. And it's that not having people know what you're going through is just heartbreaking for me. So that's why I'm always like, even if you could tell one person, and the sooner you do it, the sooner you'll get through, because there are those those years in between, like 2 or 3 years, that is it's upsetting for everyone. You're opening Pandora's box. But once you get through that and that elephant in the room is squashed and you started to find your people who are in your corner, you will just find this new freedom and happiness and understanding, and also kind of a like, do you know what? Like, I'm going to go and kick ass now because this has taken enough of me. So now I'm fighting back. And that's why, as I said, it just makes me so sad when people wait till their 60s, 70s, 80s, and even some people never share. And it's really sad because, you often hear of things like suicides and people say, but we don't understand. We didn't know anything was wrong with them. And I often think, well, maybe there was something that they never told you. So I really do think, and I know from connecting with so many people who I've spoken to since I came out, there's been so many people who've been suicidal. There have been so many people who've lost their jobs because they couldn't find the words to tell their bosses, their employers, what they were going through because they hadn't even told their husband. They couldn't tell anyone. And because of like mental health struggles, they had to leave the workplace. I know people whose relationships have broken up because of sexual abuse, because they haven't been able to tell their other half why they feel so vulnerable, why they don't want to be touched, why they don't want to be loved. All of this, and it's just because people can't speak out. So that's why I think it's the most important thing, because not everybody gets a result or justice for what happened to them, but you can seek freedom for yourself and for your own mind, and you can ultimately not let them win by being happy and by being strong and by thriving in life. And the thing is, abusers, particularly abusers of children, they might have done the damage while you're a child, but they have you in a chokehold until you basically don't let them. And by speaking out, by telling people, that's freeing yourself, but also it's saying like you're not scared of them anymore, whether they're alive or dead. And I do think it's another thing that I've connected with for like a lot of people that I've spoken to is that the state as such here, I think it's the same in Northern Ireland as well. They call it historical abuse, which is a term that I hate because, as I like to say to people, I don't feel historical. I'm 34, and when I think of historical, I'm thinking of like Henry VIII. But we're still very much living this. Yeah. But your abuser might have since passed away. That doesn't mean you shouldn't speak out about it. You really shouldn't. You shouldn't bury it just because they've been buried, that way. And likewise, if you think it's going to cause massive complications because it's somebody who someone knows, again, that shouldn't stop you either. You need to remember that what happened to you, what happened to me, what happened to my sister, what happened to other people we know is a crime. And not all crimes get legal justice. A lot don't, in fact. And I know from dealing with the legal system here in Ireland, from dealing with the police here in Ireland, it is a very complicated system, and it is just not black and white. And for a lot of this historic abuse as such, it's very, very hard to prove. Mm-hmm. And therefore, it's very hard to seek legal justice. And that's why, again, going back to why I speak out, is because when I tried to fight for justice in the legal sense, it was so upsetting when we didn't get there. And we had a very complicated case, and my family and I did everything we could to fight for it. And as I said, I have a very strong family network. We had incredible lawyers. We were very fortunate to work with incredible lawyers, and we still didn't get there. So for people who don't have access to that, it just breaks my heart because it's such a hard fight. But everybody should go on that journey. Everyone should fight it because you have nothing to lose. And off the back of that, that's when I decided, because when we were going through the legal system, that was all kind of very private. And off the back of that, I just said, well, I didn't get there in that way. And if I just kind of don't tell anyone about it now, then what have I achieved? I've achieved nothing. So by speaking out, you're achieving so much, and you're helping other people, and you're making other people feel like they're not alone in something that is incredibly lonely.
I'm just listening, and I'm thinking of the people that are listening, like you, Hannah, that have went through this. what would you say then was that key moment where you're like, right, I'm going to tell the first person? I know it was when you were 16, but then when you get into your 20s, what actually made you have the courage to do that?
So really my sister.
Okay.
My sister's mental health got really, really bad. And like I was mentioning earlier, we didn't know why. And, you know, she's absolutely, well, she's everything you'd want for in a sister. She's everything you'd want to be yourself. She's so incredibly talented. She's so bubbly, so fun, so unbelievably beautiful. And just an all-around incredible person with a fabulous husband and so much going for her. And then there was just this deep underlying sadness that we didn't understand. And when things got so bad, that's when my sister decided to talk to me. And, you know, I'll never forget it, going over to her house that day. And I remember I sat down on the bed in her spare room with her, and she goes, Hannah, there's something we need to talk about. And when she said that, I just instantly knew, even though me and my sister I never knew it had happened to her too. Never, ever, ever knew that. I thought I was the only one. There were others, but I didn't find that out again until after. But with my sister, I didn't know. But the second she said that, it just hit me, literally like a tsunami. It just hit me. And she said to me, I was sexually abused as a child, and so were you. And I can't deal with it anymore. And so from that moment on, we formed our little cocoon and we just went on our journey. And even yesterday, like it's 8-9 years on, I only sent her, I forwarded her on a message because my sister, like she's not like doing Instagram and stuff like that. So I let her know everything that I kind of receive from people. And only yesterday I had a message from someone saying, hi, Hannah, I just want to let you know that I'm just kind of out of trial and we won. And I just want to let you know that I thought about you and your sister throughout the whole process. And the day that you had said you and your sister didn't get legal justice was the day I fought harder and harder and harder to get there. And I just want to let you know that we won. I'm going home now to write my victim impact statement. And I just want to let you know that you helped me so much on the journey. Mm-hmm. So like, that's what me and Caroline and I, like, that's what we, like, that means more to us than even our own win in court or anything. Like I remember once upon a time, like someone had said, like, you know, you could be looking at a settlement. We didn't want a settlement. We don't want money. We don't want anything like that. We wanted justice first and foremost, and for this person, for it to be acknowledged, the disgusting crimes that they committed. And secondly, we wanted to make it known that just because something happens when you're little, or maybe it's not happening now, that people can still be penalised for that, because actually it's the laws here in Ireland are horrendous around that. And also, if somebody reaches a certain age and they're basically deemed non-compos mentis, like not fit to stand trial, essentially they can get away with a lot, even though at the time of the crime they would have been compos mentis. So there is so many layers of complexities to this, but it's amazing because if people listen to us and they have a better chance of getting justice, and we were the people that kind of encouraged them to go and get it, and then when you get those messages saying we won, it's just, you feel like I've never met that person. I have no idea who that person is. But like, I remember I think I was on the Lewis when I read the message going into the office. And I remember being like, yes, like you go girl. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, felt like I was a best friend or something. And I sent the message to Caroline. She was like, yes, this is amazing. And like, we must have now had maybe certainly 15 or 16 cases that have won in court. And all these people have communicated with me and my sister to tell us. We've had people who we went to school with who, not the term, I don't mean the term, we weren't friends, but we just maybe weren't in the same groups in school, or friends who were different years in school, who've come forward to both me and my sister to say, just want to let you know, we heard you on X and Y, or we read about you in this, and I just want to let you know that it also happened to me. And it's someone who, you know, you've known but not closely, and now all of a sudden you form this kind of new and unique bond with somebody. So by Caroline being so brave to come to me and tell me what had happened to her, and that was particularly brave because not only was she opening Pandora's box for herself, she knew it was for me too, because she knew it had happened to me. And so that was doubly upsetting for her, because she knew that I think she thought she knew that I was able to really bury this, but she saved me ultimately from getting as bad as she got. Because yes, speaking out about it, for the few years after, it was really, really tough. I started to develop really bad panic attacks. I'd never suffered from anxiety before. I was just like carefree, literally. And then all of a sudden, like, I got to the point where I was ended up in A&E with really severe panic attacks, thought I was dying, could barely leave my house. It was horrible for my husband. It was horrible for me. I felt really, really vulnerable at work. And at the time I wasn't self-employed. And I felt so little support in that workplace. But I learned so much from that as well. And now that I'm an employer and, have 6 people on my team, I make sure that I'm extremely understanding to anything that they might be going through, because I was so not supported at that time. And it's hard, it's hard when you work, and I work in public relations, and it's notorious for, you're a slave to the grave. You work all hours, it's deadline after deadline. And, to turn around to an employer in an extremely fast-paced, very well-known agency and say, look, I'm going to have to leave at 3:00 on Wednesdays now because I go to a psychotherapist. And for them to say, really? Couldn't you find an appointment after 6:00? When you know that there are like 6-month wait lists for certain like psychotherapists, it's not very encouraging to get that kind of reaction. And especially when you've been quite vocal and said things like, my family are going through something really, really tough at the moment and I need to be supported. And then you're still getting emails at that time. You're still expected to have your deadlines back on time. That's a very anxiety-inducing environment to be in. But that was a catalyst for me leaving and going out on my own, because at that time I needed to be on my own terms. I knew I was very good at what I did for a living, and I was never, ever going to let this abuse stop me. But for that period of my life, I couldn't be in a toxic work environment, because I needed to put myself first for once in my life. In public relations, it's clients first, it's brands first, it's not yourself first. So at that point in my life, it needed to be me, and my sister needed to go on her healing journey. I needed to go on my healing journey. And that needed flexibility. That needed, you're having an off day and that's okay. And where I was working at the time, that just was not accepted at all. I'm sure that has changed now, and so much has changed and progressed over the last 8 years. In fact, I think it's probably been one of the most interesting, I'd say 8-10 years in history, in terms of like everything from kind of like maternity cover and all of that, those kind of conversations in the workplace, and mental health in general, and how that now needs to be looked at just like someone saying I'm off sick for the flu. So a lot has changed, and I appreciate that, things were probably a little bit different then. But at the same time, it was a very, very tough thing to navigate. And again, I know I keep saying this, but that's why I also really love encouraging people to speak out, because you will not be able to perform at your best if you are going through this alone. You just simply won't, and you will crash. And that might mean that you would end up maybe being let go from a job because you weren't communicating effectively that you needed some time off. And instead you were kind of making mistakes, or were late, turning up late all the time, or not turning up for various things just because you were struggling so badly, which, with something like this, and particularly if you do end up getting diagnosed like I did with the likes of PTSD, that there's PTSD has a mind of its own. Like 1 month you could be flying it, not a bother on you, and then the next month it's come back. So if you are dealing with that, but your employer has no idea what you're going through because you haven't told them, that's where kind of a further, I suppose, anxiety is going to form for you, because you will know that you're underperforming. You will know that they know you're underperforming, but they will think it's just because you're not doing your best. So it's so important to be open. And even if you don't feel open enough to say exactly what you're going through, it should be, and if any employer is good enough, and particularly if you work in a big company, of a HR department, you shouldn't need to go into the nitty-gritties of it. You should be able to say that there is something going on and you need a little bit of time. So maybe even start there. Let that be your starting point. And then when you've gotten that little bit of time off, then you might be able to kind of consider, okay, what next? Am I going to tell a family member? Am I going to tell a friend? Or actually, am I going to start by telling somebody who I don't know, i.e. going to therapy, and maybe getting a therapist's advice on then how you move forward to telling your loved ones. So yeah, this is all kind of the journey from really that began, as I said, in my early 20s.
Just taking a short break, guys, from our guest. We're going to be back really soon, but I want to let you know about our fabulous partner that we're partnering with for 10 full weeks, MCG Property Group. Are you thinking about renovating your home but you're not sure where to start? Then our podcast sponsor, MCG Property Group, have given you a simple tip. Why not begin by writing down your top priorities? What changes would make the biggest difference in your home? Take just 10 minutes to do this, and I can help turn your ideas into a plan. And when you're ready to bring that plan to life, MCG Property Group is the team to trust. They're a family-run, female-led business with over 15 years experience. MCG takes the stress out of renovations, handling everything from budgets and builders to timelines and building control. Their expertise means your project runs smoothly, on time and on budget, so you can enjoy the transformation without the hassle. We do not need any more stress in our lives. If you're still in just the idea stage, then check out MCG's website. It's linked in the show notes for expert advice to help you take the next step. Your dream home could be closer than you think. Thank you for listening, guys. Now we're going straight back to our amazing guest. And those bits that you've said, they're like actionable steps are so good. Like, you know, that bit, you don't have to tell it all. I think that probably would scare people, having to like just pour it all out. What should people expect when they do tell? Because you did talk about how the legal system, and when you told the police or the guards, or you know, what's going to happen for these people that are listening that do tell? I know it's maybe different now, like you said, but what should they expect, Hannah?
So I think there are platforms now, and there are organisations now who are quite good at, you know, advising on those steps. I don't think anyone can give you better experience though, someone who's been through it. Because I sometimes go onto those websites just out of interest to read, and I'm looking at them going, what a load of, you've not been through this. You can tell. You might be a therapist, you might be able to advise on that side of things, but you've never actually had to go into a police station and write a statement and have that statement read back to you. You can just tell the difference of people who are actually lived victims and others who maybe have listened to victims. So from my perspective, it's really great to be able to tell someone first before making that step to go to the police, for example, because that is a very scary, lonely, awkward, deeply uncomfortable environment to be in. I had, as I said, told my family at that point. I don't think I'd mentioned earlier, I only told Richie, well, my now husband, my boyfriend at that point. I'd already been with him for 8 years at that time. I'd never told him. So I told him too. And then I told a couple of my best friends. And one of my best friends, a girl called Kate, amazing girl. And she was really supportive of me. And it was actually Kate who came to the police station with me. I was living in London at the time, but because the abuse happened to me in Dublin, that's where from the very brief research I did was you want to give a statement in the country where the crime happened to you. I learnt more on that as the process went. So myself and Kate went to a Garda station in Dublin, but we went in completely blind. And bear in mind, you're going into a Garda station 3:00 in the afternoon, Thursday. They're usually dealing with people who need a passport stamped, or I've lost my driver's license, or my cat stuck up a tree. Like, no offence, but you know, to go in and say, hello, I would like to tell you about a crime that's been committed. I was abused as a child, and I would now like to tell you what happened. I remember kind of the first guard that I met was like, oh, okay, right. Oh, they didn't have a clue. But I don't mean that disrespectfully. I think this has very much changed over the last 8 years. And there are processes in place for taking very sensitive statements. But at that time, there really wasn't. I was kind of passed from one person to the next. And I was then taken into a room, which is, if you've watched shows like Love, Hate, it's just like that. You're in this very grimy room with one chair in the middle of the room. You almost feel like the criminal yourself. And there's you on the chair, there's the table, there's the police at the other side, or the Gardaí. And you then you read out you basically give your account and they write the statement. Then at the end, they will read you your statement back. So that is still the case, I believe. You still go in and you make your statement. So I would say to have somebody with you is a really, really good starting point for that, because it's so upsetting. I've cried my whole way through it. The other thing that's beneficial about having someone there is that you will rarely have the energy to tell your story multiple times. In fact, I have rarely discussed the extent of my abuse or the detail of my abuse with anybody, because it's just so hard to get those words out and to actually say what happened to me. But when you're giving your statement, you have to give every single detail. I was giving detail on the pattern on the curtains that I remembered and what the door handle looked like and the music that was on in the background. You are brought back to that time, and that is incredibly triggering. So having someone there with you not only helps you just to rub your back or to get you a cup of tea, but they also hear your story inside out. And then at least you have one person who knows the extent of the trauma that you went through. So that can be really, really comforting to just know that that person just knows everything about you and will always be there for you. In my case, and again, I don't know if this is very different now, I went through all of that. And then I remember the next day, seeing a police car arrive outside my house. And I was like, oh, weird. I wonder what they're doing. And they came and they said, look, we're so sorry. But we've been told now that because of where the abuse happened to you, that we weren't the right station for you to come to give your statement. So you're going to have to give your statement again to the station local to the area where I was at the time that I was abused, basically. And I was like, you think you could have told me that at the start? Because I gave every detail. I told you exactly where I was when I was abused. So that was really, really hard. And I remember kind of straight away that kind of made me really angry with the police and just really how could you not have handled that better? Or how did you not know that? But you go on journey and I'm just coming out the other side. And these people, they weren't told that, and now there's much better systems in place. So basically, long story short, for anybody who's listening who is thinking about coming forward, the best thing you can do is either call into the Garda station or give them a call. Say to them that you're looking to make a statement that's in relation to sexual abuse. Do they have someone at that station who has experience in dealing with abuse victims? And if not, could they maybe put a call in to have someone kind of commissioned to go to that station on that day, who it doesn't make you feel like a complete alien when you walk into the room, because they do that now. So there are specialised members of An Garda Síochána who are very experienced and well-versed in dealing with sexual abuse victims coming forward. So it might be that that particular station doesn't have a dedicated member of their force to help you. But I believe, and this is what other victims have told me since, is that they have gotten someone in, or else I think people have gone into sort of the main Garda office, which I think is just around the corner in Harcourt Street. And there's a few, but anyway, they will do their best to find you someone who's the best person to go and speak to, basically. And that's something that they should be doing at a minimum. At least then you know that you're not going to feel, again, that you're talking to someone who is used to dealing with shoplifters or traffic, incidents, because that certainly was my case, which was really, really hard. Also, there are other next steps, and there are organisations. One is 114 No More, which is a charity organisation in Ireland. I know on their website, they kind of have a lot of information on sort of abuse advocacy and their advice on next steps or what to expect from the legal system, what to expect from dealing with the guards. All of that information. There is good information on that site. I suppose as a victim, I would say that you do your research online of good solicitors and lawyers in Ireland who have good cases in dealing with abuse. That's what we did. We did our research and got an initial meeting in to look whether this was feasible. It's going to be very different for everybody because there'll be some solicitors and lawyers and legal practices who might be willing to work with the victim on a no-win, no-fee basis. There will be others that'll be just you're paying legal fees from the get-go, and that is not feasible for the good majority of people. So I would say a lot of this is you have to do your own research. But in terms of the Garda and like making your statement first and foremost, that is the best first step. And actually, I would say do that before you tell a multitude of people. Because especially if you are an abuse victim and this person is still alive, this person might still be in your neighbourhood. I know from talking to a lot of victims, most victims I've spoken to, and I know this is like, and I'm saying it so almost blasé, but most victims I've spoken to, it has been a direct family member, a neighbour, a sports coach, a teacher, or a friend's relative, a friend's dad, a friend's aunt, a friend's uncle. That's how close we're talking. Like, I don't actually think I've received, and I've saved down about 128 people who've come forward to me to tell me their child abuse stories. Every single one of those 28 people has been abused by someone who they knew very well. And so you are better to go, you block that that it's someone you know, and you go straight to the police and treat it just like you'd treat any criminal. Because as soon as you start telling one person, that person tells, and if that person is still alive and well, they can be tipped off. So I would say if you want to seek justice and you mean business here, I would say go to the guards and report this just as you would report a burglar coming to your house. And that's really hard to do, especially when there are emotions involved and connections involved. It's very hard. But you have to be a bit selfish in that front. You really do. And I mentioned 1 in 4 no more. Again, definitely worth looking at that website to get some advice. But I know, Caroline, I'd mentioned to you before when we'd had a call that it's my absolute goal is for myself. I really want to try and build a community. Myself and my sister Caroline were discussing it. Like, we'd love at some point to be able to, whether it's an event as such, like a free event that we could invite families of victims, you can come anonymously, whereby we have representatives from various organizations or various kind of touch points that are going to be really important to you on your journey of speaking out, seeking justice, seeking help. A representative from, a therapist of sorts who has experience in this space, a representative from An Garda Síochána who can discuss that process of making your statement and how to do it in the best way. A legal representative to discuss what this could look like. Another thing to note when seeking legal justice is it is an extremely lengthy process. You're talking, it could be 5, 6, 7 years. So that's very frustrating as well, particularly if for that person, they know their victim is still walking around scot-free. Mm-hmm. And you're talking, it could be 7 years, and it's an if this person gets done. But I think by talking to people and by hearing that and knowing that, like, I know this is so frustrating, but it's just the way it is. But the sooner you get going with it, the sooner, you're on that journey. So yeah, I would absolutely love to be able to do something, to use my voice, to use my experience in a way to bring people together, to help people in getting the information that I didn't have myself. I've done so much research. I have read like articles after articles in America, in Canada, in Australia. I've been researching so much on sexual abuse cases, trials, everything. More than I'd say any 23-year-old would ever have had to read. I have so much knowledge on this space now, and the Irish legal system is very, very behind. It's a complete drag, to be honest with you. So that's why community is so important, because there's a lot more justice you can get than the legal sense.
And that's going to happen. I can tell in the passion and the determination that event, whether it's online, face to face, whatever. You're already built the community. I'm going to talk about community now and how important that's been on social media. But when you and I were chatting, you talked about what you're a mummy now, I'm a mummy. What us as parents can do with our kids now in relation to language and everything. And I thought that was so interesting. I actually talked to my own mummy about it after me and you were on the call. I said, like, Hannah said we should be able to say these words. And my mummy was like, because I said vagina, because you said to me, like, we should be able to say that word. And I could see my mummy be like, like first time I'd ever said that word in my life, but it was after our call. She was like, that girl's right. And I said, I know, but no one's really saying this. So I've just put it into words. But can you tell me about that, what your thoughts are on that?
Yeah, so I guess this is something that I've talked to my sister a lot about. Yes. My sister is a mum of 3 amazing little girls. And so she's trying to, I suppose, put into practice things that she thinks would have kind of helped her. And look, so much of this is just generational and it's nobody's fault, but it's just important for change makers to come about. That's it. It's not a case of blaming the way schooling was or the way parents used to talk to us or anything like that. There's no point in, discussing the past. It's discussing the present and the future. And I think if you're using terms like private parts, then be rest assured your kid will think that they're private, so they're not going to talk about them. If you can't even give your kids the words to their genitalia, then how are they supposed to come forward to you and say, like, they're not going to come and say to you, like, would you take it as seriously if someone said, oh, like, they touched my private parts, and you're like, what, did someone like tap your bum when you're walking into a room? Or, you like, it'd be a bit blurred lines. If your kid comes to you and says, somebody touched my vagina, I think you would take that pretty seriously.
Absolutely.
And I'm not saying,
we always have been afraid to say that word.
Yeah, exactly.
And I can see now what you're saying, that people are then not even able to say it when something really bad happened.
Even in London, only recently I worked on an amazing PR campaign for the Gynecological Cancer Fund. It was actually called the Lady Garden campaign. And it was centred around the idea that we as women all come up with these crazy names for our vaginas because we just don't want to say the word vagina. Like everyone will call them flowers, foofs, whatever it is. And that's why there was this Lady Garden campaign, because people would call it a bloody lady garden. So what can you expect of an 8-year-old if you, as a 40-year-old, can't even say the words? Then you're making it alien for them too. The other thing that I will say, and again to repeat, is that you, as a child, you just look up to your elders so much. You trust elders, because that's what you're conditioned to do. And I think that's why it can be very hard for abuse victims, particularly if they know the abuser, because you think that what they're doing is maybe okay because you've been told that, like, always go to an adult if you have a problem. So if an adult is doing something to you, you kind of think like, oh, maybe that's okay. So you can't expect a child to know right from wrong, particularly if this adult is very manipulative and saying things like keep secrets. And we all, like, I've nieces and a nephew. Well, my nephew doesn't talk yet, he's a baby, but I've nieces. And like, very innocently, you can say things like, now, don't tell your mum that I gave you an entire ice cream. You be rest assured they will not tell their mum that you gave them an entire ice cream. So kids keep secrets. And that doesn't, by the way, that does not make you a bad mum or dad or anything like that. It's just the way children are. But I think sometimes it might be important to shift the dialogue a little bit. And rather than hoping that your child will come to you and tell them that this happened to them, whether it's in swimming lesson or in tennis lesson or in school, or when they were been minded by a minder or been minded by a neighbour or minded by a family member, maybe it could be worthwhile just every so often to say to your child, are you happy? Is everything good at the moment? Has anyone made you feel scared? Has anyone made you feel uncomfortable? Has anybody ever touched your penis or your vagina or your bum that you didn't think was right? And I know that sounds so awkward, but maybe every so often it's important for every parent to do that. And I'm not saying every day or every week, or you don't need to become this incredibly overbearing person. But children don't have the words. So I think sometimes you need to give them that space and that opportunity to come forward, because you know, you might save your child from enduring something that they think is right, but it's absolutely wrong. And I think as well, it's important to look for signs in your child as well. And now I'm no expert. I have a 14-year-old Jeepers, a 14-month-old little boy. So I'm absolutely no expert in parenting, that's for sure. But I believe, and again, from talking to other people in this, I suppose, community of victims and families of victims, that there can be signs that maybe indicate that something is scaring a child that they may not verbalize to you, but like bedwetting, maybe not eating, maybe overeating. There might be things that you see are kind of trends happening that maybe point to, and that could be, it could be pointing to something like bullying in school. I'm not saying it's necessarily abuse, but I definitely think change in habits, or as I mentioned for you, I was very defensive. I still probably am. I know for my sister, there were other things that she felt that she displayed as a child that probably went a little bit, you know, unnoticed, just because she didn't verbalize what was happening to her. So I think it's just maybe not ignoring signs would be really important too. But look, I'm going to go on this journey of being a mum myself, and I hope because of what happened to me, I don't become this incredibly overbearing parent. I really try not to be. Already, like, I have a childminder who I really, really trust. And very soon, I'm sure my son will go to crash and everything like that. And he needs to do all those things. And you have to have faith in humanity, but you also still need to be mindful that, as I said, about those over 120 people, that abuse happens before your eyes, essentially. And to just never be too sure.
I know, such good. It's such, because we hear the stories and we hear and we sympathise, but those actionable tips are what people need. So I have taken a lot from that as well in my own family, and I said it to Jared as well, that I was going to be meeting you as the girl that said about being able to say vagina, and he shuddered. Because we don't say it, and he said to her husband. So I think it's so refreshing to hear, and good, and this is good advice for people. So there's loads of bad things to be said about social media, but we talked about how good it's been for you in building and the support and the community and all. And just, if you want to talk, I know we don't want to keep you too long, but if you want to just talk about that and how good people have been to you on there. I know you said people are sharing, but also the people who are encouraging you and wishing you well.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's been overwhelmingly positive. It really, really has. I mean, you probably want to be a bit of a bad soul to send someone a shitty message after they talk about being abused as a child. But look, it was really nerve-wracking for me to ever speak out about this, because I suppose I've built a career in public relations here in Ireland. My social media is a bit of fun for me. It's where I show my clothes and the beauty products I love, the kind of escapism in life. And maybe I started posting on Instagram because I needed escapism at that time. And I think I actually did start to ramp up my Instagram when I was in my kind of mid-20s, which were the years where I was going through that really, really awful time of my life, with, as I said, the panic attacks and, you know, everything like that. So I've always found Instagram, I take it for face value for what it is. I think there's obviously very scary sides to social media. But in terms of community, there is no negatives, I think, from speaking out. And whether you have 26,000 followers, or 2.6 million followers, there's no harm that can be done by you telling your story. And also, yeah, there might be people who look at you differently, or maybe some people will unfollow you because they're like, look, I don't hear about this. That's fine. It's not your role in life to be relatable. In fact, I hate the word relatable. I think it's utter nonsense. It's one of those words that people have come up with, I think, to make themselves feel better sometimes. Everyone's social media is theirs and their own. It's you choose who to follow. You choose who to relate to. It's not that person's job to relate to you. And that's what I feel about abuse and everything like that. It's a really uncomfortable topic. And yes, sometimes it's quite hard for me to navigate it into my Instagram when I'm there talking about fashion and beauty and my dog. And then all of a sudden I have to talk quite seriously about something. but that's my life. And my life is made up of all those things. It's made up of family, it's made up of fun, it's made up of travel, it's made up of work, but it's also made up with the fact that something really bad happened to me as a child. It continues to impact my life, maybe not daily, but certainly regularly. And I feel that for me, I wouldn't be my authentic self if I didn't share that part of me. If I'm going to share when I'm putting in my omelette for breakfast, then I should probably share something that is a huge part of who I am and my identity and the whys, the why I am like I am. And I mentioned earlier, it's been such a driving force in my career and in my life and in my ambitions and my attitudes, is because I felt that I can't change what happened to me then. And, you know, there's times where I can't even look at photos of me as a kid because it makes me too upset. So I just want to, I want to be the best Hannah I can be now. And so I think by putting that out there in social media, it's showing victims that you too can get through this. And you too can have other things. So there are certain points where abuse will be all of you. It'll be all your life. Especially if you're going through a trial at the moment, or you're doing your statements, or you're telling family, like, it feels so heavy and it feels like it'll never get light again. But it really does. It absolutely does. And like, I really want to encourage that of people. And to also kind of say as well, like, you shouldn't be afraid to show your vulnerabilities on social media as well. I know there's nasty people out there, but it's like, that's the truth. And I think that's the way social media should be. And I also, like, I don't think social media should be all about sob stories and stuff like that either. But I don't think mine is necessarily a sob story. I think it's just, I think having the confidence to speak out about something that's very real. But I don't speak about it all the time. I much prefer talking about fashion.
Yeah.
I'd find it much easier to go on a fashion podcast, believe me. I don't do it for praise. I don't do it for followers. I do it to help those few people who need it.
Yeah.
And that's why, really. And I think social media has really given me, and it's made me feel like I've such a purpose. Particularly when I didn't get justice in that sense. It's really, it made me feel like, you know, I think I was meant to kind of talk online. I think I was meant to have a bit of a following for this reason. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I've kind of really found great comfort in that community. And I think other people have felt comfort since becoming part of that community too.
And that work you plan to do with you and your sister of them maybe bringing that community into a real life environment, not that social media isn't, but it's kind of faceless in that way.
Yeah.
Is going to be huge.
Yeah.
The advice that you've given today alone, you can tell that you've researched and read other people's experiences and all. There's just so much there. So much we could talk about, but obviously we're not going to be here all day. But I thank you for opening up, for making me feel like it's okay to talk about it. I didn't even want to say the words at the start, but then it's like, no, I should say the words. So thank you. I've learned so much as well. And probably people in the room as well that are behind the cameras and everybody that's listening. Hannah, I always have, when I'm trying this series to end our conversations with, like, what's the best piece of advice that you've ever been given? Is that something that you can think of offhand? Like, what's the best thing I was ever said to you? Like, the best piece of advice in work or the best piece of advice in life? Is there one thing that stands out to you of how to, just advice that keeps you going every day?
Yeah, I guess probably life is not a dress rehearsal.
Yeah.
That's something that really stands to me. You know, you only get one life, you get one chance at it. So don't wait to do the things that you think you should do or want to do. You know, there's no good time. Go for it. You know, as I said, it's not a dress rehearsal. You don't get a few tries at it. You don't know what's coming around the corner. So yeah, kind of make every day count.
Yeah, I love that.
And then from a work perspective, I suppose, I think what I continuously try to remember is just that phrase, stay in your own lane. Particularly working in public relations. And here in Ireland, you know, there's a multitude of agencies. You work with a lot of brands. Those brands have a lot of competitors. For me, I have a mentality of, I do not care about the competition. I really don't. I think you're not busy enough if you're caring about competition because you're not staying in your own lane. So I think stay in your own lane, focus on that and smash that lane you're in. You don't have to be brilliant at everything, but be brilliant at what you're doing. And, you know, it leads into another, I suppose, phrase that I love is imitation is the greatest form of flattery. And if someone is copying what you're doing, you're doing it right.
Yeah.
So yeah, stay in your lane, and life is not a dress rehearsal, so give it socks.
Love it, love it, love it. And you are brilliant. And I just want to say too, for people listening, we're going to link in the show notes the charity that you've mentioned, different organisations in the North and South, and how people can get the support that you've talked about as well. And we're also going to link your social handles for perhaps people who want to reach out as well, Hannah, because I know you're very active on there and replying to people and stuff. But I just want to say thank you for being on the Dig podcast, for coming today face to face and joining us here, and for sharing your story with our listeners. And we can't wait to keep following your journey as well and see where your work brings you, because it's just going to make a real difference. It already is. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.